that harvest which is so rich and ripe for the harvesting. Lord, we pray all this in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen. Welcome again to you, and we're glad that you joined us for this webinar. And right now, I will hand over this presentation to Alan Helms, who is Vice President with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Foundation. And Alan will be talking to you today about endowments. Alan, take it over.
Okay. Thank you very much, Todd. And I want to apologize once again for the technical difficulties here. I am out at a remote site doing some work with a congregation today. We were not able to test the settings prior to my calling in a little bit before 1 o'clock here Central Time. So I apologize for that, but good afternoon or good morning to some of you as the case may be, and welcome to all of you who have joined this month's webinar hosted by Rural and Small Town Mission. Today's topic, as Todd mentioned, is establishing a congregational endowment fund to benefit ministry. I want to thank Todd again for his introduction and for this opportunity, and to Amy for all of her work at facilitating the information that is going to appear on your screen. We will be covering 4 different areas in today's presentation. First, we will spend some time talking about reasons to have a ministry endowment fund in your ministry, either your congregation, your school, or whatever other ministry you might be a part of. Then we will spend just a few minutes on stressing the importance of clearly defining the purpose of the endowment fund, because this becomes the cornerstone of your communication to your ministry. And then the bulk of our time together will be spent in looking at the parts of an effective endowment fund, and we'll begin then to entertain some questions as we approach the end of our time together. So let's begin today with just what I would call a very simple definition of an endowment, one that will serve our purposes for today. There are certainly more technical definitions. There are certainly more detailed ones. But this one, I think, will serve us well today as a good general baseline. You can see on your screen that I have broken the definition down into several parts. An endowment is comprised of assets, and you see some of the asset categories listed there, that are given to an organization to provide ongoing support, the support being over and above the current revenue stream of your organization. And so for a congregation, these would be dollars, perhaps the principal portion of those gifts or the earnings that those gifts represent, or a combination of both, over and above weekly offerings. Or for a school ministry, those would be dollars over and above tuition, subsidies, assessments, whatever the revenue stream of your school ministry is comprised of. So what we're talking about here is a source of revenue, a financial resource beyond the offering plate and beyond capital campaigns, that is managed by the ministry in a separate fund, that management generally consisting of 2 primary responsibilities, investment and distribution, but more about that later. Let me share with you a brief story to illustrate the need for a proper endowment fund. I want to show you a picture of Ralph. Ralph was 100 years old when this picture was taken. He's now in heaven, but when he was alive on this earth, he lived very simply in southeast Missouri. He never married. Ralph had no dependents. He had a very generous heart, though, and in his later years, he learned about and began using charitable gift annuities with the foundation to provide himself with regular income competitive with what he could receive from certificates of deposit at his local bank. And he designated the remainder amounts of those annuities to various LCMS ministries at his death. Ralph remembered a lot of different ministries. He was a very generous gentleman. But we noticed that none of the gifts were designated for his home congregation. So we went to visit him to thank him for partnering with the LCMS Foundation in this way. And during the course of our conversation, we asked Ralph why no gifts were designated for his home church, the church where he was baptized and confirmed and where he received the Lord's Supper regularly for his entire life. You can see his answer in the quotation below his picture. They won't know what to do with it. You might think Ralph didn't care for his home congregation, but you'd be wrong. He just didn't care for it. He loved it. He loved that little country church. He loved them so much that he didn't want to hurt them or destroy it. He knew that all they would do would be to fight over his gift, and it would end up doing them more harm than good. It would be a curse instead of a blessing for that little church. Less than a month ago, I got a call in my office from a pastor in the St. Louis area asking if the foundation could help him and the congregation he was serving. He explained that the leaders had just learned that the congregation was about to receive a large bequest, and that news greatly concerned the pastor. He told me, quote, "One of my previous congregations received a large bequest, and it was the worst year of my career. That gift almost destroyed us." End quote. So you see, not having an endowment fund can put a congregation in a precarious position, at a disadvantage when a large gift comes their way from a faithful Christian steward. Having a poorly constructed endowment fund is no better. So let's look at ways we can avoid experiences like the two I have just told you about. Not having an endowment fund is not bad. Not having an endowment fund doesn't mean that your congregation is substandard, not in any way. But let's look at reasons to have an endowment fund. First, it provides an organized and orderly method to responsibly receive, manage, and distribute these over and above gifts to ministry. It's a way to reduce arguments. It keeps the ministry's mission foremost in the minds of its members, rather than unnecessary and often endless debate that absorbs a lot of energy about how we're going to spend or use or save that gift. It keeps these kinds of gifts the blessings they were intended to be, a resource on which to build ministry, not a curse to tear it down. The second reason you see there is closely tied to the first. You see, whether you as either the pastor of a congregation or as a leader in the congregation, whether you realize it or not, members are watching how the congregation's leadership deals with a bequest or another large gift. Those members want to give gifts too. They want to be generous. They want to share what God has entrusted to them. But as good stewards, they want to do that responsibly. And the majority of the donors want to remember their local congregation with a significant portion of their gifts. So the existence of an endowment fund gives members the confidence they need to leave gifts to their home congregation. They see that there are rules and procedures in place to safeguard their wishes. The last reason you see there on the screen for having a congregational endowment fund might be listed there third, but it's certainly not least. A proper endowment fund is a valuable part of a congregation's development or funding plan, which provides the means by which ministry initiatives such as outreach, expansion, new programs, or being able to capitalize on a God-given opportunity, an endowment fund provides, or a development plan provides, funding necessary, because we all know that most of the time funding from the offering plate or from annual commitment amounts just aren't enough by themselves to fund new or expanded ministry opportunities. Also, the endowment fund is not an end to itself. It's not a nest egg, a savings account that will just pay the bills when we are no longer able to. That's not very exciting to most members. In some cases, members just plain get lazy, knowing that there is a safety net if they don't respond to God's love as generously as they should or could. Remember, it is always important that congregations have a mission and vision, a clear, well thought out plan for the ministry they desire to accomplish among their members and in their community. But without a method to fund that mission and vision, members may feel defeated before they start. So there is difficulty in generating excitement, optimism, and a high level of involvement. That picture you see on your screen right now demonstrates that the importance of having that development fund. Now, let's go to the next part of our presentation and consider the question, what is necessary to engage members and encourage their participation? We have found that in order to get members to take an interest in the Congregational Endowment Fund, they must be able to receive positive answers to the three questions you see there on the screen. Do I know the mission of the congregation? Do I believe in the mission of the congregation? Am I convinced that the congregation's endowment fund will help accomplish the mission of the congregation? Your communication regarding the congregation's endowment fund should address these three questions. And in addition, communication to members about the endowment fund also needs to answer 4 additional questions that will naturally come to mind as you begin informing members about the endowment fund. Those 4 questions are, what is the endowment fund? What is the fund designed to accomplish? How can the endowment fund be used, and how has it helped others? And finally, how is the endowment fund going to help me with the plan for generosity that God has placed in my heart to accomplish? One of the basic goals of communication to members in the pew should always be to help them understand what an endowment fund is and what is intended to accomplish. That leads us right into talking about why a clear endowment fund purpose is so important. I made a statement earlier about thinking of an endowment fund as a nest egg. That may have been concerning to some of you. It may be what some of you see as the purpose of a congregational endowment fund. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Perfectly legal, but in my opinion, not preferred. And here's why. Christians have a built-in desire to be generous. That desire was placed in their hearts by a gracious and loving Heavenly Father at their baptisms when they were given clean hearts in God's image. They want their gifts to accomplish something. They want to know there is a documented process in place that will make use of their gifts. Amy, why don't we go back to that previous slide? Thank you. Endowment funds enable God's faithful Christian stewards to partner with the ministries they care about long after their earthly lives have come to an end. This is a way to provide long-term financial support that changes lives and saves souls. So I want to give you just a couple of quick examples of some purpose statements that will kind of tell you what that part of your endowment fund document should perhaps read or sound like. Here's a very simple purpose statement. To provide an organized and responsible way to encourage, receive, and manage special gifts and bequests to use for supporting and assisting the mission of the congregation. To provide an organized and responsible way to encourage, receive, and manage special gifts and bequests to use for supporting and assisting the mission of the congregation. Having that statement as part of the fund's purpose gives donors the confidence they need to leave a significant gift to the congregation, the confidence that their gift will be received, managed, and distributed in an organized and responsible manner, that it will be used for ministry. Let me just give you a couple of other simple, quick purpose statements. One could read this way: to sustain the congregation's Christian purpose, vision, and faithfulness. To communicate the gospel message with harmony and intentionality for generations into the future, even until Christ returns, might be another one. But whatever purposes your ministry chooses as its reasons for the existence of an endowment fund, they should be communicated clearly so that donors understand how the fund will make use of the gifts it receives. So it's important then that the fund supports the purposes of the ministry for which it was established. Now let's look at the 4 steps to having a proper and effective congregational endowment fund. And the LCMS has accumulated resources to assist ministries with all 4 of these steps as they develop an effective endowment fund. So here they are, and they are somewhat chronological. The establishment of a fund, or if you have an existing fund, the review of that fund. The promotion of the fund to the congregation. Growing the fund. And then finally, the management of fund resources, the prudent management of fund resources. We'll look at each of these steps in detail. Perhaps you're on this webinar today because your congregation does not have an endowment fund. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean that you're a below average or substandard congregation in any way. Perhaps, though, that you are seeing the need for one. Resources on the LCMS Foundation website to assist you in the establishment of an endowment fund or the review of an existing fund have been gathered into a 24-page ministry endowment fund booklet. This booklet can be found on our website, and I'll just go through the steps that are on your screen quickly right now. First of all, you would go to our website, and you see it there, www.lcmsfoundation.org. And once you log on to our website, you will scroll down along the left-hand margin until you see the option Establish a Fund along that left-hand side. You'll click on that option, and then a page will appear that's titled Ministry and Congregation Endowment Funds. Scroll down this page until near the very bottom you see the option Download the Ministry Endowment Funding Booklet. And clicking on that option will open a PDF version of the booklet. You are certainly welcome to print and reproduce that booklet as many times as you wish. So again, our website, then along the left-hand side to Ministry and Congregation Endowment Funds, and finally the option to download the booklet. So let's look just briefly at some detail to each of those 4 steps. As you recall, step 1 is establishing an endowment fund. Pages 10 and 11 of that ministry endowment booklet provide a checklist to assist those in the congregation interested in developing an effective endowment fund. This checklist will help you discover what is important to the congregation's future. Page 14 of the booklet provides a sample outline for an endowment fund bylaw. Additionally, samples of generic endowment fund documents are also available by emailing me with your request. My contact information will be provided at the very end of today's webinar presentation, and so you'll have my email address and know how to get a hold of me. Let's say that you're attending today's webinar because your congregation already has an endowment fund, but it isn't being used. Or perhaps it's dormant or overly restrictive. Perhaps it has other deficiencies that render it unpopular with the members of the congregation. And so if that's the case, I would suggest that step one for you is to perform a review of the endowment fund you already have. The endowment fund's purpose should match the congregation's mission and vision. It should offer donors choices that allow them to designate ministry areas that are especially close to their hearts. Page 12 of that booklet, that Ministry Endowment Fund booklet, contains a Ministry Endowment Fund assessment, a questionnaire that would be helpful to you. And in addition, I would encourage you to send me a copy of the existing bylaws so that one of our experienced gift planning counselors can review it and make suggestions to you for improvement or revision. Now, before we move on to the next step, a word about choices. Just a few minutes ago, I mentioned that a properly established endowment fund should offer the donor choices. In other words, the fund should carry inside it a number of what I call sub-funds that allow a donor to more specifically designate his or her gift for an area of ministry that is particularly meaningful. This is an excellent way to keep interest and participation in the endowment fund at a high level. Members will understand that gifts in the future will be made to fund work of special importance to them. Sub-funds are also a good way to guard against an endowment fund becoming overly restrictive in its purpose. That could lead to funds either not being able to be used or could lead members to become disinterested because the funds may not be used for the purposes that are close to their hearts or important to them. It could also alleviate confusion or competition when there are multiple endowment funds for different purposes. Some quick examples of sub-funds might be this. Within your endowment fund, you would have established a sub-fund to receive gifts intended to be used for mission or outreach ministry. Or perhaps another one for Lutheran school ministry, or for capital improvements, for human care or benevolence ministries, for music ministry, for seminaries and university support. So there are all kinds of sub-fund choices you can give to your donors to motivate them to leave a gift. Next, let's look at the second step to develop an effective fund, and that is to regularly promote the fund in the congregation. You see, once the endowment fund is established, the work then has only begun. If you want the fund to grow, the congregation must know that it exists and what its purpose is. That's where communication is key. To help members understand what an endowment fund does and how it can be used to satisfy their desire to be generous to the ministries that they love. Here's a quick list of ways to promote the endowment fund to get you thinking of other creative ideas that you might have. You can put bulletin sentences in the weekly worship folder or bulletin each week. You could put something in your monthly newsletter, or perhaps once a month a little larger insert into the bulletin, the Sunday bulletin. A simple brochure which the foundation can help you design, or a letter from the pastor that introduces or encourages participation in the fund might be helpful. Information and links on your website. A presentation or a brief update to the congregation periodically about the fund. Perhaps sponsoring a stewardship Bible class in which the endowment fund committee can also tell about the fund and its work. As I mentioned before, the LCMS Foundation has samples of many of these different types of communication pieces that you can use and you can customize to promote its endowment fund. They may be found by following the same steps I described earlier for downloading the Ministry Endowment booklet. One of the more effective promotional activities that we have seen involved a congregation who held an annual endowment fund dinner. The entire congregation was invited to this simple meal. The endowment fund committee paid for that meal by using a small portion of undesignated earnings. And after the meal, the endowment fund committee made a report of the fund's annual activity. They would give the beginning balance from 12 months prior. They would talk about the gifts that had been received and the amount of earnings received. They would talk about gifts that were made out of the fund during the previous 12 months, how much those gifts were and to which ministries they had been given, and then they would communicate the ending balance of the fund. In some cases, they actually presented checks to some of the ministries at that dinner who were receiving gifts from the endowment fund. In this particular case, one check went to a local homeless shelter and another to a local food bank. Representatives from both those agencies were there to receive the endowment fund gifts and to express their thanks and explain their organizations and how the gifts would be used. We felt that that was a wonderful way for the endowment fund committee to motivate their fellow members to understand, realize, and become involved in what an endowment fund could do. So once that promotional plan has been talked about and put in place, the endowment fund committee can turn its attention to the third step, growing the fund. Now, when we start talking about growth, many automatically assume that the most effective way to grow an endowment fund is through prudent and effective investing. While striving for a high rate of return will help the fund grow, it is not the fastest way to grow it, especially when the endowment is in its early years and the balance is small. We think that it is more important, especially at the beginning, to create the correct stewardship environment. A stewardship environment that welcomes and encourages members and other donors to support the endowment ministry of the congregation by making gifts over and above the offering plate, either during their lifetime or a testamentary gift when God calls them to heaven. The foundation offers a process that we call the Lifetime Plan for Giving, which takes the member or a donor on a 4-step spiritual journey to discover how they can make the very best gifts both to their family that they love and the ministries that they care about. And certainly their local congregation would be one of those ministries. You see, Christian stewardship is a calling we follow all the way to heaven's doorstep. Part of our Christian stewardship is to see that the blessings God has provided to us through our lifetimes are responsibly transferred at our death to family and to ministry in ways that will bless them, not be a curse to them. The final step in the Lifetime Plan for Giving process is an asset distribution plan that comes from the heart. That's what we call our Lifetime Plan for Giving process. And I want to take just a little bit of time to go through the 4 steps to that Lifetime Plan for Giving. There's a discovery step where a trained LCMS Foundation gift planning counselor will sit down with you to gather information about you, about the people and property in your life, about how God has blessed you, and so forth. That gift planner then will meet with you a second time and in what we call the design visit, showing you ways to use your estate to bless family and ministry. The third step is a summary visit where a complete explanation of the gift plan that you have brought forth from your heart through prayer, thought, and discussion is put down and finalized on paper. And finally, there is the implementation step, where we make sure with the donor that all the necessary legal and charitable documents are completed. In our 55 years of existence, the LCMS Foundation has seen time and again that Lutheran Christians love their local congregation. In the vast majority of cases, these members want to see their local congregations grow and thrive, to continue to make a difference for eternity in people's lives until Christ returns. There's no better way of fulfilling that heart's desire than remembering the congregation's endowment fund in their will or living trust. That's what our trained gift planners can help members do by using this process we call the Lifetime Plan for Giving. Let's look briefly then, as we get near the end of our presentation, to the last step in having an effective congregational endowment fund. And that step is in managing the fund. Now, in many cases, but not all, only the earnings from an endowment fund are utilized. And so it's imperative that the fund be invested to earn the highest possible return for the least amount of risk. Amy, let's go to that next slide. Let's be clear here. The highest possible return is desired so that the support for ministry can be as great as possible, not so that we can build bigger barns or sit on a bigger nest egg. The LCMS Foundation can offer assistance in this area of investment management to your endowment fund committee. Investing with us in a custodial relationship does not require the congregation to relinquish ownership of the funds. The endowment fund assets always remain the property of the ministry. We believe that for a congregational endowment fund committee, prudent management of risk associated with long-term rewards is the preferred course of action. And I want to stress again in the strongest possible way that the primary objective of any endowment fund should be to provide the maximum amount of resources so that the ministry or outreach or impact of the congregation can flourish and be of significance. That the endowment fund will be viewed as helping the congregation change lives and save souls. When members see ministry taking place because of resources from the endowment fund, that will serve to generate interest in and additional gifts for the fund. You see, donors want to see their gifts used. They want to see ministry happen. That's why they're giving their gifts in the first place. Simply using an endowment fund as a rainy day nest egg does no one any good, least of all that lost soul who desperately needs to hear the good news. One last story. The story of Jim and Esther, who are now both in heaven. Jim and Esther loved their church. They also loved to go camping with their family. And they found satisfaction in helping single mothers in their community in a variety of ways because they had a niece that experienced the trials and challenges that can come from being a single mother. Jim went to heaven in 2002, Esther just last year. In their wills, Jim and Esther left a generous gift to their congregation's endowment fund. 1/3 of the gift to be used by the endowment fund committee for women's ministry. 1/3 to be used for outdoor ministry. And 1/3 undesignated to be used as the endowment fund committee decided. I hope you saw or caught in that gift designation that they're fairly broad, that they give the congregation wide latitude, the endowment fund committee wide latitude in how they use those gifts as God brings them opportunity. Why did Jim and Esther do things this way? Because their congregation's endowment fund documentation The Endowment Fund Committee's communication and the track record gave them the peace of mind that their gift would be properly received, managed, and distributed. They trusted that the leaders of the congregation would carry out ministry for years to come as they wished. Ministry in the areas of life that were special to them. That's the blessing of a proper congregational endowment fund. That concludes our presentation for today with the exception of questions. You
At
see
this
my
point, Alan, at this point, Alan, I do have I have a question that came up here. Got to get back to my page of the questions. I have one question on how much money does it take to start an endowment, or what would be a good starting point?
Well, I'm going to answer that two ways. I would say from an LCMS foundation standpoint, and to set up a custodial account with us to manage your endowment funds, our minimum requirement is $5,000. Now, I have seen many congregations start endowment funds for much, much less, or with much, much less than that. And initially, they keep the funds perhaps in a separate account at the local bank or whatever. And then when it gets to $5,000, they will become involved in a custodial relationship with the foundation. But there really is no minimum. I would say that if there is a member in the congregation willing to give an initial gift to establish the endowment fund, that we can start getting a few earnings, whatever they might be, and we can make a gift out of that endowment fund, however small it might be, I would encourage them to do that.
So starting somewhere is better than starting nowhere, correct?
That's correct. By the way, I do want to acknowledge at this point that we're asking Bill Langston to join the call at this point, and to be heard, he is also a LCMS Foundation employee. He can add his comments to it as well.
You're sharing all of that. Well, we just had a little hiccup with her. I tried to move Phil in. I've got another question, Alan.
Okay.
The question, congregations struggle to make ends meet. Each year. How do you help focus on endowments when many are in survival mode?
That's a difficult question. I would say if congregations are in that situation now, that they, of course, should give priority to those survival techniques or tactics operate, but they should not ignore or have it be at the end of starting an endowment fund. If there are funds that can't, because if you think about it, 30 years ago, if someone had started an endowment fund, perhaps the congregation wouldn't in a survival mode today. So while the situation isn't ideal, I would not delay.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah. Planning ahead. Unfortunately, many of us had it too good for too long, and that we stopped planning ahead a little bit. I especially, Alan, appreciate your comment about not trying to use the endowment to build a bigger barn for a rainy day, how can we help folks move out of that hoarding mode into the using endowments and the gifts that we have from the Lord to do that ministry right here and right now?
I think the best answer to that question is that when you form your endowment, you put on that committee a couple of people who are minded. You need to have people on there that have some investment experience, but also put some mission on that will convince or help you convince the rest of the committee and the congregation to use the funds.
So a nice mix of folks who have that financial background, along with those folks who are mission-minded. That's the key.
Yes, I think to have that combination is the key. Don't have it weighted all one way or the other.
I think oftentimes that's what we tend to do. We want to get all the finance guys in one room and let them take care of it.
And what are they trained to do? Grow an investment as big as they can grow it.
That's right. Phil, we're glad to see you on the line now. You have anything to add to that? So, I got him. Now, Phil, I'm going to have to interrupt. We're not getting any sound from you. As it is with technology. That's all the questions I have for this afternoon. Alan, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, perhaps with just a couple of minutes that we have left. One of the questions that we get a lot is how much of the fund can we each year? And my answer to that is that, the term endowment might imply only earning, but that's not necessarily the case. It's how you define in your foundation or endowment fund document how those funds will be used. For instance, for new construction or capital improvements, you may want to. So it's really up to the congregation how much of the fund they can use.
And I think that's a great comment, and I think maybe the emphasis, Alan, would be on the fact that they need to do that planning ahead of time and not be reactionary. Would that be a fair statement?
That would be a fair statement, right. To think about that when they're establishing the fund.
Very good. I just got, Phil had typed into the side there the comment that he wanted to make regarding it, but I think this goes well to the overall topic. He said, my comment was to use endowments to highlight the mission and the vision of the congregation, align it together and encourage God's people to see what God sees in their potential. I really appreciate that comment because I know in a lot of the work that we do, we tend to see all the different organizations and even those involved with the finance or even endowments, they all are kind of on their own page and not all on the same page. I think that's a huge piece for especially these small congregations and in rural congregations, which don't necessarily or historically haven't done a lot of visionary planning.
Good. That is a good comment from Phil. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add, Alan?
I don't think so. I would just encourage those who were on today, if you have other questions or if you need some of those resources, to contact me either by phone or email so that I can help you.
Very good. And if you can't get in touch with Alan, please, you see our website down on the left. You can find this webinar archived there, or our email address as well. Again, thank you all for being with us today. God's blessings to you all in your ministries, and as you go out to seek to do what God has encouraged us all to do. Thank you, and God's blessings.
Thank you.